I'm Mary Crafts, and I get to be with you today and bring you a very special podcast about a warrior who has done a journey that is worth listening to. And she's emerged on the other side with so much wisdom and so much knowledge on how she crafted her meaningful life and set the platform really for the rest of her life, and what that's going to look like and how she's going to craft the next phase of her life. And she's written a book on it. It's called 2 Feet In, and it's available on Amazon. We have those links at the end of the podcast. But this is what I find unique about Jeanne, and that she's so much like me. She has a career. Well, I had a career, but she has a career in interior design. And it has blossomed and unfolded into more of a guide on how to live life. And so welcome to Jeanne Collins. Jeanne, welcome on the podcast.
Thank you, Mary, for having me. That was such an introduction, and the bar is high now for me to live up to.
Oh, it's like up there, you know. Okay, as I was reading about you and all these different things on your website and on your personal one sheet and on your LinkedIn, all those things, the one thing that kept just catching me was that you are an interior designer. That was your career. That was what you did. And you took that and learned how to craft your interior design, and you're providing a blueprint for others we think about interior design and crafting what's around it. But oftentimes we don't spend enough time designing our own interiors. So let's start with that. Let's start with your warrior journey.
Yeah, so you are so correct. And I love that you have captured that from, what I have out on a social platform and out to the public. So I think there's a couple of things that are really important about my journey. First is I was not always an interior designer. Oh. And I spent, which I kind of talk about, but so I spent 22 years as an advertising sales rep, and I ran a sales team for a public company for advertising sales. And I did that for 22 years. And then in January of 2020, right before the lockdown, I got fired. And I was a single parent, and I was the only vice president of sales at the time who was a woman. And there was a part of me that couldn't even believe how could they possibly have fired me. But yet at the same time, that was such a pivotal change into, as you say, how I am now, have now crafted my life and the person that I am now. And if that event had not taken place, which is so often deemed as such a negative, getting fired, I would not be the person that I am today with the story that I have that I think is really inspiring and helpful to people. So I didn't start out as an interior designer. Interior design was sort of like my hobby that I did for myself and for my family and my friends. And after I got fired, I had to really think about who am I going to be? I was also about to turn 50. And it felt like this midlife crisis was coming in.
You got fired at age 50?
Right before I turned 50. Yeah, I did. And right before COVID too. So it's I lost my big job. I'm a single parent. I own a house, big mortgage. I lost my job, which I'd had for 11 years. And that's how I defined myself, was as a vice president of sales. I lost my job. We had COVID. So now all of a sudden we're home. We were about to become home. And it was the year that I was about to turn 50. And I kind of felt like I didn't think midlife crisis was real, but here I am in the, about to have it. And I really I had to spend some time in the very beginning, just trying to figure out who I was and what did I want to be? What did I want my life to look like? How did I want to feel in my life? And what did I want to do? Because I realized after I got fired that my life was killing me. And I needed to do something different. And I needed to find a different way because I was so stressed and I just was not a happy human. So as part of that journey, what I decided is I loved interior design. It was my hobby. And I decided if I have to work for 20 more years, which I will as a single parent, definitely have 20 more years in me, if not more, I want to do something I love for a change. I want to be excited and passionate about getting up. And so I decided, I didn't have a degree in interior design. I had no background that justified me becoming an entrepreneur and owning my own business. However, I decided that I knew the life I wanted, and that in order to get to that life, I needed to make these changes, and I needed to find something more passionate that I could be doing for a living and figure out how to make money at it. So I started an interior design business, and that was 4 years ago. Yeah, which is kind of crazy. And the life I live now as a result of that is just drastically different than the life I lived before, in terms of my mindset, my wellness, what my days look like, how I feel, my grounding, my inner peace, the person that I am, how I look, like everything about it is different. The people that I know now, my social circle, which can be really scary for people to recognize that sometimes when you make these massive changes in life and you have to go through the war, as you call it, you're going to come out a different person. And that means there also might be different people in your life, but that's all for the good. All for the good.
Yeah. I love that, Jeanne, because the last few guests I've had on have had the same sort of mantra learning experience. And that is that all those things that we saw as horrific in our lives and like the end of all existence kind of things, actually, when you got just enough past them, the perspective was those were your greatest gifts. And
sure.
it gives you this sense of that I can persevere, I can be resilient through anything now because I've seen that all things are for my good.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I also think you are responsible for your life, and you as a human are responsible for creating what you want in your life and for attracting what you want in your life. And so you have to learn to take a very active role in your life as the main player. And I think a lot of times, especially as we start to get older, we do what we do because it's what we've always done. And that's the character that we are, and we just keep going. And I think sometimes you need a massive explosion to happen in order to really think about, like, is that even the person that I want to be? Do I want to even be in that play? Because I maybe don't. Maybe I want to be in a different show.
Precisely. You know, one of the things that I know about every single warrior's journey is that they didn't just have this massive explosion one day and then all of a sudden the rainbow came out and they knew what to do and they went forward. Most all of us have things that we have carried with us from our childhood, from our early times, and we carried into this part so that when the explosion happened, all of those things came bombarding us. So talk to me about that. Let's get you real and vulnerable for my audience. What things came with you through that you didn't live this perfect life and then all of a sudden were able to make this revelation?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, oh my goodness, so much comes with you. To give it some context, I've been married and divorced twice. I got divorced the second time when I was 6 months pregnant. That's not what most people do in life, right? I was raised, my parents got divorced when I was 8, and I was, raised with divorced parents, and I was raised with a mother who provided a lot of good that I talk about in my book, but also gave me this negative, which is believing that I am not worth enough, and I'm not worthy enough, and I will never make enough money, and I am not the same as the other people who live in this very affluent place that we live, and I'm not the same, but I'm not the same for different reasons. And so I think I spent decades, I know I did, defining myself and defining my worth by money. First husband loved me so much because he must love me. He bought me this huge ring, that doesn't make that a good relationship. But that was the baggage that I came with. And so I have had to do a lot of work, to separate my self-worth and my identity from money. Really, to be honest, and it's a constant battle. I'm always still talking about it and always working on it because I think it's very common. I think a lot of people come with that baggage from their childhood, and that makes you feel like you are not worthy enough, and it hurts people's self-confidence. And I'm fortunate that I have managed to have an incredible amount of self-confidence, even in spite of that. And so I like to write about that in my book because I do have a lot of self-confidence in spite of having this foundation in my life that really should lead me to have no self-confidence. And I was raised with very little self-confidence growing up. And, even until I would honestly say until my 40s, I didn't have a lot of self-confidence at all.
So like me, I'm 70, you're now in your 50s, but we've met hundreds of thousands of people and in our lifetime. And of all of those people, I think maybe I've only met like 2 or 3 who could honestly look me in the eye and say, I did not come with baggage from my childhood. I think that universal concept that we all have baggage, and it's okay because that was the plan. Okay. The plan was that we get messed up and then we become these absolutely awesome, badass people as we refine it and go through it and understand it and realize that, I not only can do some things good, I am enough.
Right.
I'm enough for everything that I put in front of me. And that's been your warrior journey. And I love that because it's been mine. And that's why we're here, is to help other women and men. Sometimes men are the last to admit it. But I'm sorry to say, but that quest that we're all in the same spot and we all can move forward. Being married and divorced twice, that puts you in my bucket as well. I just started my third marriage just 3 weeks ago.
Congratulations. Wow,
yeah.
Good for you.
That's why I was traveling all those. Ireland, we got married in Ireland, and then we went to Puerto Vallarta. And so there is that sense of, well, maybe it's too late for me. And maybe life has passed me by. I hear that from so many people, especially women in their 50s. But you didn't feel that. You were able to bypass that. How did you do that?
So and you're right. People say all the time, I'm too old to change careers.
Yeah.
I'm too old to meet someone new and have a relationship. I'm too old to learn new things. I'm like, oh, get over yourself. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So I think for me, it was really a mindset shift. And instead of looking at it like, I am 50, I am like on the back end of my career, I flipped it around and I was like, wow, imagine what I could do with the next couple decades, imagine what's possible. And it's 100% a mindset shift. And it's like everything that I am doing right now, even writing a book. I mean, I had no business writing a book any more than I had a business,
Yeah.
What did I know about writing a book? And yet here I am. And it's same thing with being an entrepreneur. What did I know about starting my own company? But now here I am. And I think if it's a mindset, it's just that simple. It's about really thinking like we're here today, now, and every day is a good day to drive change, to live a better life. And why not start now? Why not start today?
Every day.
What are you waiting for?
Day.
What are you waiting
right.
for? What are you waiting for? Because that, I think, is a lot of people's problems. They're like, well, I'll try something new when this event happens, then I will make a change. And if you're constantly living your life waiting for the win, then you're not living in the present and you're not embracing, and you're just wasting time.
Yeah. All those crazy things that aren't working for us live 2 places. They live in the past or they live in the future. But if we focus on today and now, that's where the change can happen. You also mentioned in one of the pieces I was reading about you, and I'm not quite sure which one it was, so you'll have to refresh my memory here. But you talked about after you have cleared some of this negative energy and the energy that was sitting on you, almost like literally feeling like it was sitting on you, then you were for the first time able to achieve this kind of balance. And I want you to tell me about that, girl, because even now I speak all the time. And the number one question is to me, how do you find balance, Mary? And so let's hear your wisdom on how you have found that balance.
Balance, that is such a big one. So yes, so what you're referring to is, I talk about this a lot, of what happened to me after I got fired. And after I got fired, the first Sunday that I didn't have to spend half of Sunday working to provide sales reports up to my boss, I reached out to a friend of mine and I said, I can't even express to you how freeing this is to not have the weight of that responsibility and those tasks and the weight of of the delivery of what I'm expected to deliver from my team. And that weight, I made the analogy. I said, to me, it feels like when I go to the gym and the personal trainer makes me put that sandbag over my shoulders and he makes me run up and down the stairs. And I hated that exercise because it was just hard. First and foremost, it was hard. I said, but what I feel like today is after you take the weights off, you feel like you stand taller and you feel lighter because you are not carrying those weights on your shoulders anymore as you walk up and down the stairs. So I said, I feel like that is me now. I all of a sudden feel lighter. I felt like I lost 10 pounds just because the stress of that environment had gone away. And so what I realized was I made a conscious decision at that time because I said, you know what, we all call it work-life balance. And I don't know why. And I don't know who decided that that is what the term is. However, I am going to make a conscious decision to call it life-work balance. And I have a whole chapter about this in my book. And I write life work. I speak it and people are like, oh yeah, that's so interesting. You turned it around. And I'm like, but why did it have to be the way it is? Who says that it has to be work life? And what happens is every decision that I make in my life, whether it's big or small, goes through that funnel of how does it impact life? And I have to work. We all have to work. We have to make a living. You know, I haven't won the lottery. So we have to work, but that work can't come at the cost of life. And so all my decisions that I make, the big ones and even the small ones in terms of my calendar and my scheduling, and when I get overscheduled and overbooked and I start to get really stressed because I've overcommitted myself to too many things, I use that same filter and I say, what matters the most from a life perspective? Because it's very easy as an entrepreneur to say yes to doing everything. And all of a sudden you've lost you. And I will say, I will then have to go back and say no to something I've committed to from a work perspective, because you know what? Life, which might be a dinner with a girlfriend that I haven't seen in a long time, is way more important today than that event that I have to go to, of which there will be 10 more.
Of which there will be 10 more. Yeah. But how many soccer games will there be again?
Correct. Right. Yeah. And how much time is there? You know, my dad's 81. How much time is there left with that? You know, friends that you don't see very often just because you're like, oh, you know, well, I'll see you next month or the month after that. And before you know it, 6 months have gone by and you haven't seen each other. That part of life matters because those are the people who give back to your soul and your energy and fill you back up with love and gratitude and a zest for life. And so you have to make sure that you include those things in your life and don't have it just be all work, because we all could work 80, 100 hours a week if we wanted to. Anyone could. We all have that capacity. Yeah. But that's not life, because then life passes us by and we look back and it's, 10, 20, 30 years later and it's like, oh, where was my fun? What did I do? How was I living? So it's just a conscious decision. Life comes first, work comes second.
It is a conscious decision. And I, at this age, and having been retired for 5 years, am faced with that nearly every day. The consequences of not living that. It's that old adage, no one on their deathbed ever says, oh, I wish I'd worked a few more hours.
Of course.
Or I wish I had another car in the garage,
Right.
Seriously. But do I wish I had spent more hours with my children or my grandchildren? And to some extent, we will probably all have a little bit of that. No one ever fulfills every single inch of capacity. But at this age, I'm very much aware that the most important things in my life are people.
Yes.
And I don't care to leave any other legacy other than with those people, that they know that I love them and that I took time for them. And I didn't always do that, Jeanne. It's a hard lesson to be learning at 65.
Yeah, no, I know. But all you can do is say, you know what? I'm so grateful that I figured it out when I did, because it's never too late. And I'm grateful that I figured it out. And therefore, I'm going to make different choices going forward. And I think you also appreciate it. Like, I appreciate it so much more now than I ever did before. Now that I realize it, I appreciate that time, and I appreciate experiences so much more. So I'm very focused on experiences with my family and with my loved ones, and the experience matters more as a gift than a gift, and so really focusing on giving the gifts of experiences and the gifts of time together and memories created together. And when that's your focus, it puts your giving in such a different place. Yeah,
none of us need another trinket. Seriously, we really don't. And Dad does not need another tie. We all know all these things. So what do we do instead? And that is the big mantra that's out there. It is the gift of time. And yet, when you're still at your age, for example, it's the hardest one to give unless you get the dialogue right inside. Wait a minute. The most important piece in my life is this person, and I want to give the gift of time.
Right. Yeah.
When the choice is placed before you, do you have to have a dialogue inside with yourself, or is it become an automatic thing now?
It depends on what it is. Sometimes it's automatic, and other times I'll have to go back and have the little dialogue with myself and just say, "Wait a minute, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? You know, why are you going to this meeting as opposed to being home to have dinner with your daughter? You know, cherish the time that she's actually physically here. She's 17, and go have dinner with her and say no." To something else. So sometimes I do have to consciously make that choice. But I do find more and more, the more often I do it, the more I choose myself and my life over these outside obligations. Because we could just fill our entire calendar with outside obligations, especially if you have children. And so the more often that I do it, and I realize no one missed me at that coffee for the volunteers. No one knew that I wasn't there. It didn't matter. But you know what? Instead of that, I went for a walk with a girlfriend I haven't seen in 4 months. And that time was so valuable and precious to get to really connect with her. And I was like, that is priceless. And the volunteer coffee that I could have, should have maybe gone to, it's okay.
It's okay.
It's not going to matter. It's okay.
It's not going to matter.
It's not going to matter. No.
And social media has really pumped this kind of FOMO to the nth degree. You see pictures of everyone else at the coffee, or everyone else at this event, or other people doing these activities. And you were like, oh, well, I think I passed on that because I said I was going to be with my daughter. And it fuels it. And I'm all for social media if it is lifting you. But the moment you are using it as a comparison tool for your life, it's time to sign off, baby. What are your 100%. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, and I wrote about this in my book too. I've written a blog post about it and an article about it as well, which is people look at social media as either really good or really bad. And I look at it as social media has a lot of value. I've connected with a lot of people who provide a lot of value and have a lot of really interesting content. But you have to be really selective with who you follow and the content that's served up to you. So if it's content that's always filtered and content that's always us on this perfect vacation from all of your friends, walk away from that, because the people who project on the outside this totally perfect image on social media are the people that actually have the most amount of problems, and you just don't know it. And then you compare yourself to them, and then you start to feel horribly. Or, oh, so-and-so lost all this much weight, and they went on this vacation, and look, they went to this event, and look how great she looks in that dress, and her husband bought her a new bag, and all of this nonsense, right? It's ridiculous because all of it's stuff. None of it really matters. But the people who talk about, I follow a woman, I was listening to her the other day. She was talking about parenting and her choice of how she parents her children, and the fact that not everybody aligns with that choice, but she's not backing down from that because she has very strong-willed children. And this is how she parents her children, is by teaching them consequences, not I'm going to slap you or hit you, but trying to educate them. So over time, right? And she even says, I hired someone to help me know how to do this because I don't know how to do this. And so she's being really vulnerable. There's no book on parenting, folks.
Yeah. At least not the right one. There isn't
not the right one, right? So it's acknowledging that you're vulnerable and you don't know how to do something, or acknowledging that you're doing something new, or, being okay, that marriage failed. It did. I'm sorry, but I'm here to raise my hand. I wasn't successful. It's okay, because then you're real. And in that sense, I think you can help other people a lot in social media because they can connect with you and makes them feel less of a bad person, to be honest, in its most simplistic format. It can help them feel oh, they're not alone. I'm not the only one who did that. And then it has a lot of value.
Yeah, it's why I asked you about your baggage that you were bringing forward, because as people see us on social media or on this podcast or having written a book or, very successful, blah, blah, there's this sense of, well, they could do that because they didn't have all this other stuff. And I always want to make sure I am pulling back the curtain. pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Well, actually, it's
Right.
the man behind the curtain that's actually controlling all of this stuff, right? And so to pull back that curtain and allow us to be seen is such an important feature. I have so many people say to me, at age 70, Mary, you're the most photogenic person I've ever known. Every photo of you on social media is like beautiful.
You look great.
And I'm like, duh, I don't post the bad ones.
Of course not.
Right?
Photoshop, my
I
friend.
take hundreds of
Filters,
horrible
Photoshop. Like, of course. And we don't post those. Like, I'll do videos sometimes in the morning. I'll think of a great idea. I'll be like, oh, I'll do a video about it. And then I do the video and I look at it. I'm like, there is no
way
I'm
posting that. Yeah.
way I am posting that. And I'm all about no filters and being authentic. But that's taking it to a level that people don't need to see. Yeah. Because that's the other part.
Yeah, but same thing. I did the video the other day and I looked at it, I was like, oh, you look so old. So I found not a filter where it changes your face, but where it puts sparkles going like this. And you're so drawn with the sparkles, you aren't noticing all the wrinkles and the sags. And I'm like, oh yeah, put that sparkles on. That's perfect, Right. But it's true. But in the end, I post enough about pulling back the curtain.
Yeah.
And showing the real me. And that I think people realize that is probably for women like you and me, the greatest gift that we can offer. And that is that gift of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And
authenticity too.
Authenticity. Do you talk about that in your book?
I do. I talk about it a lot. And I talk about it when I speak also. I had to make a very conscious decision when I started writing the book. When I was about 3 chapters in, I really had to think about, what was the purpose of the book, right? And the purpose of the book is to inspire and motivate women to feel empowered to take control of their life and become the designers of their own life. That is my purpose. And I wrote it saying, if I impact one woman's life, I will have succeeded in writing this book.
Right.
And so I decided, in order to do that, I had to be willing to be really vulnerable and really authentic and not scrub out all the stuff that isn't as politically correct or as kindly seen by other people and things that people might judge. And one of my copyright editors at one point wanted me to take out, a whole page of content because she felt it was too controversial and didn't want the negative press about it. And I said, I am not going to take that out because if someone doesn't agree with it, that's their choice not to agree with it. But I am then stripping out the parts of my past that make me who I am and have been really important in my journey. Yeah. And so I think being like, I'm going to tell my story to inspire and motivate you, but I'm going to just be selective and I'm just going to pick like A and B, and then we're going to jump over to F and we'll include that. We're going to skip those parts in the middle. That's not authentic. And people want to connect with real people. And if you want to inspire and motivate real people, you have to be true and authentic and be like, you know what? Guess what? Like, I am not perfect. And even when I talk about it in my book, there was a period when I was writing my book and I was going to therapy and I was so depressed and I would be driving down the road and I would just burst into tears for no reason whatsoever. And I was just really sad and I was really depressed all the time. And I had stopped writing because I'm like, I'm writing a book about living my best life. And here I am like crying on the highway. What is that? How am I an expert in living my best life when I am so depressed and going to therapy and taking medication? And my therapist said to me, that is one of the most important things to include in your book because it makes you real. And you talk about how you got to your state of depression. You talked about how you worked through your state of depression, and you talked about how you got out of it and where you are now as a result. And that makes you real. So don't remove the real in the story just because it's not as perfect and shiny. So you have to. And so I talk about that. I talk about it from a resource perspective. Like, there is no shame in going to a therapist. There is no shame of taking medication. Like, raise your hand. I am struggling. That is okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that gift. Yeah. I think you've talked about today 2 of the things that in my life and in my book even were the 2 most important principles that I needed to learn. And that I wanted to learn in order to move on. And the first one you talked about is the gift of accountability. To pack your bags and get the heck out of Victimville and be accountable for every single thing, every piece in your life. And the second thing that you've talked about is the gift of vulnerability. And if I could teach one class to every single person in this world, what would be the one class I would teach? It probably would be that it is vulnerability that allows you to connect to people. Without it, there's no true connection. And I know that you feel deeply about both of those. So as we walk to the end of this, I want you to talk to me about your book, 2 Feet In, because you didn't just like stand back and write about what you thought you should do. You jumped in with 2 feet and you actually did the warrior's journey. But how those 2 principles still manifest in your life, accountability and vulnerability, and how those 2 principles will see you through to the next phase and beyond.
Oh, and those are such good principles. Like, you have to hold yourself accountable for your life. You are, nothing's worse than the victim mentality. I talk a lot about that in the beginning of my book, because that was my mother and my first ex-husband when I realized I married my mother, who was, this
Oh, wow,
victim.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. And, my mother's 81. She's still the victim of everything in life. I'm like, oh, wow, you get away. But so I think accountability is so important, because one of the things I did when I decided I was going to write my book was I made a really I jumped all in. I hired a book coach because I didn't know about how to write a book. I had no idea what I was doing. And he was really helpful, but I made myself accountable for that commitment. And I wrote every day for an hour every day, except for the period where I was really depressed and I didn't feel like I could write again. And then I actually used the writing to help get me out of the depression. But I held myself accountable. I was like, I had a deadline. I said, I am going to do this. I am on a mission to do this. This is really important to me. I felt like I was making that decision based out of a place that had so much passion and such a desire to want to help others, and that's coming from a really genuine, good place. So I made the commitment and I held myself accountable for it. And I held myself accountable for the deadlines and for getting it done. And then I magically did. I did get it done because I held myself accountable for setting that goal and creating that change in my life. And so I think accountability goes both ways. You also have to hold yourself accountable for your goals. And don't just say, like, I put goals out there and I didn't meet them. Well, what did you do to, they don't just because you put them out, like people talk about manifestation, like just because you put out there what you want, it doesn't just like magically appear at your front door. You have to do the work. You have to be willing to do the work. So I think that for me is just a part of who I am with 2 Feet In, is I make these decisions and then I move forward with full accountability for myself and for my life. And that is not going to change. And then you talk about vulnerability. I talked a lot in my book about the beginning of my life that I didn't have any emotional connection. My parents didn't tell me they loved me until I was in my 30s. And so I was raised without any emotional connection to anyone other than maybe my dogs. And that baggage has taken me decades to fix. But part of having an emotional connection with another person is that you have to be able to be vulnerable. And learning to be vulnerable and learning to put yourself out there in spite of what someone might say or how they might judge you is such a powerful gift you can give to yourself, because then you're more authentic to you. And then you feel like, I am living me. I'm not living what they want me to be. I am living me. And that gift is, as you know, is so empowering. And so vulnerability, those are 2 great words.
It is about empowering ourselves. And once we are somewhere on that journey timeline, then we begin to get to help empower others. Thank you for being on this podcast with me, Jeanne. You are a light. You are a warrior. You are someone that will continue to inspire people for decades to come. I encourage all of my listeners to jump on Amazon. We've included the link at the end of this podcast, and to buy Jeanne's book, 2 Feet In, and then follow her, read about her. She is a woman that will inspire us all, like I said, Jeanne, for decades to come. This is only the first book of many I sense from you. And I want to hear about what's going on in your life when you write your next book 10 years from now. And maybe you'll write another one before then. Because once you start on this empowerment journey, that the lessons begin to flow to you. You open your arms to all that you can learn. And once your arms are open and you're in the position to receive, it just starts pouring in. And that is the gift of crafting a meaningful life. Thank you for being with me, Jeanne.
Thank you, Mary, so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
And namaste to all of you.
Crafting a Meaningful Life.